Welcome to another episode of RestorationCast. This week we're going to be talking about Egypt. It should be an interesting lesson. There's a lot to know about Egypt. But before we get into all of that, we want to do a little promotional plug, I guess. This month, the month of February, is Spanish month at our house.
Espanol.
Yes, exactly. We plan to bring in some interns, right? So
interns.
Yeah, over the course of the summer, for the month of June, we're hoping to have 4 interns come, and we're gonna basically teach them.
Quattro.
Yeah, he's already got it down. Right? So we're gonna teach these interns some very rudimentary Spanish phrases.
Very rudimentary.
The idea is this: to make them conversational rather than actually fluent, because we only got a month. So we're going to try to teach them that, try to teach them some stuff that they need to know for the mission field, and then send them off on a month-long mission trip. So if you know anybody that's interested in interning, you might point them in our direction.
Yeah, it should be an interesting month. We're like you said, we're hoping to really kind of give them a crash course, not trying to make them fluent, just want to try to help them to be interactive, to be able to interact with the Spanish. A lot of folks go on short-term missions. You've been on a lot of short-term missions, and they do good things. They go down and they build something, they paint something, whatever, but they don't really get to interact with the people so much. In fact, you told me, sometimes you go door knocking, but you have to have an interpreter. You're just kind of decoration, I guess, as you go to the door. But the goal of this particular internship is to give the young people enough of a communicative, is that a word?
I don't know.
Say that in Spanish.
I can't.
I don't think it's a word there either. Anyhow, we want to give them the skills so that they can at least be interactive.
Yeah, exactly. So that's our internship plug.
That's our plug for the internship.
Plug for the internship. So if you would pray about that for all of us, and then if you know anybody, again, we've only got 4 slots for interns, but we haven't filled up all 4 slots yet.
We have not.
And so
looking for basically college-age students.
Yeah.
If we can, older kids, and I don't think they speak Spanish in Egypt.
No, they don't. I don't believe that they do. So
you saw my segue, what I did there.
Yeah, that wasn't, our Spanish thing wasn't exactly topical, but
no.
We are going to talk about Egypt, and
yes.
I guess they speak Egyptian there.
They might.
I mean, I'm sure they did. Know. At one point, they might speak Arabic there now.
I bet.
I don't know. I haven't been to Egypt. So.
I haven't been to Egypt. I've been close. I was to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was.
I almost went to Egypt.
I even went to the Dead Sea, like we talked about last time.
Mm-hmm.
That's getting down there towards Egypt. You know what I'm saying?
That's true.
That's true.
Yeah, down south.
Down south.
All right, so we're going to talk about Egypt. And
let's do that.
As always, we're going to start off with a little history lesson. And again, I don't know that we've said this before. You probably picked up on it. But whenever we say history, we're not talking about in general history. Last time we did talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. But typically what we mean is actually like Bible history.
Right.
So
the real history.
Well, yeah. I mean, other histories also
fake,
theoretically accurate.
Yeah, I suppose it is.
Pretty sure George Washington was a real person, even though he wasn't in the Bible.
Yeah.
But
the record is inspired of this real history.
Yes. Okay. So, inspired history.
Thank you, son.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of Egyptian history we're not going to go into because the Egyptians kept fairly good records.
Yeah.
And so,
good point.
We know a lot more about them than we do some other ancient peoples. But we're only talking about the Bible here, and we're kind of summarizing what it has to say.
Biblical history on Egypt.
Yes.
Do we have anything in the New Testament divulging anything about Egypt?
We do a couple places.
Hey, are we going to see them?
We're going to look at one of them. Yeah.
Look at you. Mm-hmm. See, I was throwing you a curve there. I didn't know if you, but you're good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. All right, so looking at Egyptian history, biblical history. So first of all, we see that Egypt was the name of the second son of Ham, which is the first mention of Egypt. We'll skip ahead to that because it's only this one verse. So it says, the sons of Ham are Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan.
See, I didn't even know that. Look at here. Already, we're like 3 minutes in, and I've learned something.
Yeah, so obviously there's not a lot to be said about this, except that Ham seems to be like the bad son of Noah, right?
Okay.
Like the other ones, particularly Shem, is like the good one-ish, more or less. He's the one that the Israelites. He's the one that the Israelites are descended from, and so looking at this, seeing that Egypt is a son of Ham is kind of a a warning, I guess, right from the get-go about Egypt, because Ham is the one that does whatever the thing is with Noah and the tent whenever Noah's drunk.
We're gonna have to give another not PG rating here.
No, we're not going to talk about it. But he does something
awkward.
Something awkward. And so like he gets cursed, and specifically it's Canaan that gets cursed. So like I don't know why. Noah. I can't pull his name for some reason. I don't know why Noah goes past Ham and says,
it goes right to the sun.
Let's curse Canaan. But he curses Canaan, and so that's part of the reason, this whole promised land thing, that Abraham comes in and inherits it, and he drives out the Canaanites, right? That's part of that curse from Noah.
Interesting.
But you also, with this Egypt idea, you kind of get the idea that because he's a son of Ham, that he's kind of listed in these, kind of bad characters in the Bible. Except we don't actually know anything about him, right? He's just a name and a list of genealogies at this point. So back to history. Abraham goes to Egypt during a famine, and I don't have it listed here, but Hagar is from Egypt.
Yeah.
And so likely what happened there is Abraham goes down to Egypt, and he ends up getting this Egyptian slave and then brings her back to Canaan. And so there's a lot going on there. We'll talk about that in a minute. Not Hagar, though, if you wanted.
Doesn't Pharaoh give him a whole bunch of stuff when he's down there? I wonder if Hagar was part of that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems relatively likely, I would say, that he does. Or that's where she comes from. It's also where the children, I just put the children, but it's supposed to be the children of Israel.
Where are the children?
Where the children of Israel escaped from in the book of Exodus, which we all kind of know that. And it's a really important thing in the Bible, right? It keeps getting brought up over and over. It was kind of hard, sifting through all of these accounts of Egypt in the Bible, because most of them don't actually say anything about Egypt. Most of them are just remember that time that God brought you out of the land of Egypt?
Yeah.
So this becomes kind of this watershed moment for Israel. I think they probably talk about coming out of Egypt more than they talk about anything else. I imagine that they talk about it more than the promise to Abraham. They talk about it more than just about anything. So this becomes this very huge, important moment for the Israelites, that they come out of the land of Egypt. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. So we're not going to belabor that point too much.
Won't touch on that.
It's important. So the other thing is, it's where Solomon's first wife was from.
First one, huh?
Yes.
He had several.
He did have several. But, I mean, theoretically, the first one. It's the first one that's mentioned in Scripture. And so I think most people, reading Song of Solomon, would kind of say, well, that was his first wife, and then later on he married a bunch of other ones, which all comes down to whether you think Song of Solomon is actually about Solomon. So if it is about Solomon, then that's probably true. If it's about somebody else, then obviously it's not. true.
We're probably not going to get to cover Song of Solomon, are we?
We're not going to cover Song of Solomon.
That'd be probably another one we'd have to give a higher than PG rating.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe one of these days we'll do a whole
Maybe
class
one of these
on
days we could
Solomon.
Song of Solomon. That could be interesting. Father and son talk about the only book in Scripture that makes us both blush.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we'll wait till I'm married. And,
okay, we can do that.
We both have a little bit more experience in that area. Anyway, so this is where Solomon's first recorded wife is from, which is interesting because it kind of immediately shows where Solomon's heart is at. I think that he's getting this wife from Egypt.
And back in the days, you may point out, a lot of marriages took place because kings were trying to make an alliance with another country. And so if you see right out the gate, Solomon is wanting to make an alliance with a pagan nation, a very powerful pagan nation, you begin to see where his heart's leaning.
Yeah, exactly. Then it's where the remnant of Israel flees during the exile.
Jeremiah.
Yeah.
They were warned not to go down there, by the way.
Yeah. Jeremiah's like, he gives this big, long speech about why they shouldn't go down to Egypt because all of these bad things are going to happen to them if they do. Basically says that God will restore you guys if you stay here. He's going to take care of you. He's going to do all of these things that he promised he would do, but then if you go to Egypt, you're all going to die. And the next chapter, they take Jeremiah to Egypt. So
they pack him up and go to Egypt. Sounds just like us today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly. And then, interestingly, I think, baby Jesus is taken to Egypt, fleeing from Herod, which is interesting because Egypt seems to be like this bad place in biblical history, right? Like, we talked about Abraham. That's kind of the next thing we're going to talk about. But it seems like it's a bad thing that he goes to Egypt. It's a bad thing, obviously, that the children of Israel flee to Egypt whenever they're in exile, right? So all of these times, it seems like Egypt is this bad place, and yet it's where Jesus flees to. And he does this like specifically to fulfill prophecy.
Correct.
It says, "Out of Egypt I will call my son," and that's Old Testament. So they're clearly, whenever they say that, they're alluding to Israel, right? And they're not saying, "Out of Egypt I'm going to call Jesus." They're saying, "Out of Egypt I'm going to bring up the children of Israel," and yet it has this future ramification also. It becomes this prophecy about Jesus that says, out of Egypt, I'm going to call actually my son this time. My real flesh and blood.
And this may be too much, but it's kind of like ecclesia, called out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there's ever a passage that actually defines this parallel directly, but the whole idea of Jesus being called out of a place of dark history to become the shining light, Savior, those kind of things, is not unlike what he then commissions us to do as well.
Before we move on, one thing we should probably talk about, which has kind of no bearing on anything, but it's interesting, is the pyramids.
Yeah, because they're in the picture.
They are in the picture. So what do you think? Do you think the Jews made the pyramids?
No, aliens did that, and
okay.
No, I actually think that. I got a weird. Am I allowed? Can I just say it in 3 sentences?
Yeah, go ahead.
This whole idea of the sons of God marrying the daughters of men and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. This whole idea that I think there's a possibility that some of that, the angels intermingle, and I'm wondering if there isn't some potential to the fact that those folks who came from that were superhumans in some sense, that kind of a thing. And you get gods such as false gods, small g, Ra, for instance, in Egypt, and you see some amazing technology that takes place. How did that happen, I kind of wonder, again, dark country, and perhaps a dark past with regards to the fallen, angels, maybe, I don't know that I can put my finger specifically on that, but I kind of wonder if there's something going there.
Yeah.
Was that 3 sentences?
I'm pretty sure that was more than 3
sentences. They
were
run-ons.
But, you used a lot of semicolons.
A lot of semis. Colons. I don't know, Gabriel. A lot of people think that the children of Israel built those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know that there's really a right answer to that question.
Good, then I didn't fail.
I mean, I guess technically there is a right answer because, there is somebody that built the pyramids, and so
we just don't know.
There's a right answer, but who knows? And so your guess is as good as anybody's, I guess.
Aliens.
Aliens could be. Anyway, so second mention ish of
is that the
Egypt.
Nile?
Yes, that is the Nile River.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so the second mention of Egypt, we've already talked about it, but Abraham goes down to Egypt. So Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 through 13. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you're a woman, beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. So, again, like this all seems kind of like this bad scenario, right? That
I got a good-looking wife, and I'm afraid I'm going to get mobbed because of it.
Mm-hmm. And we don't, obviously, we haven't really gotten into the actual story part of this, but basically what happens is they go and they do this plan that Abraham has come up with, and it immediately backfires because Pharaoh sees Sarai and he's like, man, she's really pretty, and so he takes her to be his wife. And
now, before it gets beyond the PG, nothing happens.
Maybe. Well, in the story, when this happens again with Abimelech, it specifically clarifies that nothing happened. And this one doesn't. So
maybe I got the two stories mixed up.
It's sort of unclear if anything happens.
Happens twice.
It happens twice.
And the second time it happens to
Abimelech? What? It happens with Abraham and Sarah twice. Once with Pharaoh, once with Abimelech, and then Isaac does it with Abimelech Jr.-ish.
So this is 3 times. One would think, fool me once, shame on me kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? But we're going to do it 3 times.
Yeah.
We'll do it twice, and then grandson will do it once.
Kind of makes you wonder if Abraham did this successfully in other places.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it?
So if he keeps trying this, you'd think maybe it worked out at least once. But anyway, so nothing good really comes of this.
No.
Well, sort of. It's actually kind of interesting because...
You corrected me, making me look really bad.
I'm sorry.
I can't think of a single thing good that came from it, so enlighten me.
Well, the thing is, Pharaoh ends up giving Abram all of this stuff.
All the stuff.
Because, and I don't know why, because...
I know, the whole thing's messed up. Abraham's the one pulling a trick, and he gets blessed by Pharaoh.
Yeah, he's completely in the wrong here, and yet it works out for him. And so, it's a weird story, but like you pointed out earlier, it seems like this is where they get Hagar. So not only does he start off with this kind of sinful, lying to Pharaoh, it leads him down a dark path, right? Because eventually he's going to sleep with Hagar to get a son, and ends up with Ishmael, and then all of that stuff happens. And
the world's been divided ever since.
Yeah, and so, there's kind of a lot going on with this story. It becomes, I think it becomes this important representation of what Egypt is. It's like this sinful place that you shouldn't go to. In fact, God specifically warned Isaac not to go to Egypt, and eventually they all do. But
yeah, it's that place that you don't want to go there because of the fact that there is the likelihood that your values are going to be diluted by the culture that is there. And so, like you say, very rarely in Scripture, and again, I can't think of any time except for Jesus going down there, is it a recommendable place to go. Mm-hmm. And yet they seem like every time there's a problem, we'll go to Egypt.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of the reason for that is in the picture here. it's the Nile River, right? So the Nile River, for some reason, causes the area around it to be very fertile, and I'm sure there's scientific reasons that I don't understand about all of that, but yeah, the Nile River causes this area around it to be really fertile, and so during famines, Egypt is the place you would go because it's well watered. As a matter of fact, that's whenever it's describing Sodom, and whenever Abraham and Lot split up, and Lot picks to go to Sodom, it says it's because it's well watered, like the Garden of Eden was, and like the land of Egypt is.
Huh. I didn't know I mentioned that one too.
Yeah, so the Nile River is pretty much the reason in a lot of these stories that they would go down to Egypt is they still have food whenever the rest of the world doesn't, because in fact you can kind of see it here that this line here, the snake, you might not be able to see it on your screen there, but that's all green. And that's just the Nile River, right? It's flowing down here, and all of that area around it is green. It has vegetation and all these things, and then the rest.
Yeah, it looks like a desert everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere around it's desert. So there's kind of this idea that this is the place where things grow.
Yeah.
Right, and so that's where they go whenever they have at least food problems, and the rest of it I don't really know. This idea of they go down there, it seems like for peace most of the time. Whenever they're in the exile, they basically go down there because there's no war in Egypt, so we're going to go to Egypt because we're going to be safe there. And, you kind of wonder what's that about? Is it just Egypt is politically strong and they don't have rivals, or they the Babylonians haven't taken over Egypt yet, so I guess we're going to go there. I don't know. Egypt now isn't really that way. I don't think anybody. I don't know. In my mind, whenever you think, places that you would go in the event of a disaster or something like that, Egypt is not anywhere near top of the list.
Right.
Which could just be my Western point of view of, I don't live anywhere near Egypt, and so obviously I'm not going to get on a plane to go to Egypt. But I don't know.
I've actually heard some missionaries say that upon visiting there, it was the most dangerous country that they visited in their European tour, and they felt very uncomfortable. I'm not trying to shed a light in a disparaging way on Egypt, but you can see how things have definitely changed, if you will, and that it's not the place that you go to in the event of an emergency. And with all of the resources that evidently are there with regards to the Nile River, I'm not sure that Egypt would even be considered necessarily a very wealthy nation. They, I guess, will have oil deposits and that kind of thing, but it's just how things change throughout biblical history. Right?
Yeah, definitely. So the last mention of Egypt in the Bible is in Revelation.
That's the last book, actually.
That's the last book of the Bible, yeah. So it's talking about the two witnesses.
Yeah.
And so we won't get into that whole story because there's a lot to talk about there. But we'll read this verse. So Revelation 11, verse 8 says, "And their bodies," so this is the two witnesses, they get killed, "and their bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified."
And Egypt?
And Egypt.
Sodom and Egypt. It's given a double whammy description there.
Yeah, exactly. And so, obviously, now that we've looked at Sodom last week, we can see that this is kind of insulting for Egypt, obviously, that they would describe Egypt in this light, that Sodom and Egypt. But at the same time, I think we can see from what we looked at about Egypt so far that it would have represented this kind of place. This sinful place, this place that you don't want to go to or be a part of anything that's going on there. So the interesting part about this is the end part, right? and it says where their Lord was crucified. So he's not talking about Sodom or Egypt. Actually, he's talking about Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And he's saying this place has become so bad that it's just as bad as Egypt or Sodom.
Wow. That's a disturbing description.
It is.
Of Jerusalem,
of
which
Jerusalem.
I think you made the point earlier on that is the most famous city on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And the epicenter, if you will, of the revelations of God and Jesus coming, and ministering and all those kind of things. And yet, here at the end, we have it described as being this perverse place, using the terms Egypt and Sodom, like you say, which are not compliments.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have that whole idea of that, and yet you also have like the hope at the end of the book that God is going to come in and he's going to restore Jerusalem. So you have this warning, I guess, of you have this description of Jerusalem, that it has become so corrupt that it's like Egypt or it's like Sodom, and yet God's going to restore it. And I think that's kind of the hope that we all have. Is like,
that's good.
We're all on the same level. We're all just as bad as each other, and yet God is going to come and restore.
Yeah, I think that was one of the more poignant lessons I learned last week with your dialogue, was that we really get down on Sodom, and rightly so. But honestly, my sin gets me as just as hot a spot in hell as theirs. And now when you parallel it with Egypt, it's pretty. If you think about it, it's pretty mindless that a pharaoh would come to the throne who did not know Joseph. You're probably going to deal with that, but how do you miss your history, man? Your entire nation was saved by this one dude, and you don't even know him. That's pretty warped. And yet that's kind of the image that we have here that's being portrayed upon Jerusalem when you call it Egypt or Sodom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to now, I guess, move into our discussion of Joseph. But we're not actually going to talk about that Pharaoh that doesn't...
Oh, we're not?
Remember
Look there, I brought new material to the show.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll talk about that next week.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Next the Red Sea.
I forgot about that. Yeah, sorry. Got ahead of us.
That's okay. All right, so this is kind of the thesis, I guess, of this particular part of the lesson. So whenever we look at the story of Joseph, the thing that I want us to remember is this idea of God is always working. And so what I mean by that is kind of this idea of like God has his hand in everything. Right? So at every moment in our lives, God is working. He is there doing things for all of us.
Good.
And so we're going to look at two different moments whenever, or times, I guess, whenever God is at work in our lives. And then we're going to look at a reason that God would be at work. And that's going to be the lesson. Covering basically Genesis 37 through 50, although we're not going to cover the whole thing, but we'll talk about some points throughout most of that. It's really Genesis. I guess it's 37 through like 44 and then 50.
Okay.
But anyway, so God is always working. He's working in our difficulties, which is something that we can definitely see in the story of Joseph.
Oh yeah, without question.
So, to summarize the story of Joseph, he starts off having these dreams, right? He has
dreamer.
This first dream, which is basically that he and his brothers are all gathering up. They're harvesting this grain, and they're binding sheaves of grain, which means something. I guess they're just like big stalks of grain.
Halloween, those things where you stalk them. I think that's what it is.
I do too, but I've never sheafed grain.
Sheafed? I don't think sheaf's the word. Sheaves.
Sheaves.
And the progressive sense is sheavenation.
Sheavenation.
I don't know. Son.
I've never sheavened.
You never sheavened. It doesn't look like you shavened either.
Anyway, so they're binding sheaves.
That's good. Good recovery.
And they're doing this, and all of their sheaves of grain for some reason get up and like start walking around, and all of the 11 brothers' sheaves start bowing down to Joseph's sheaf. And it's kind of odd, right? Like, you kind of say, what?
I've had some weird dreams, though.
That's true. The problem with this is Joseph goes and he tells his brothers about this dream.
That could be problematic.
Yeah, which you kind of wonder, like, is Joseph, like, being arrogant here? Like,
yeah, I wondered that.
Look at me. You guys are all going to bow down to me. Or is he, just like, man, this was such a weird dream. Like, you guys, what happened here?
Or maybe he's just naive.
Maybe he's just maybe he doesn't recognize that his brothers are going to take offense to this.
You'd think he'd get the point, though.
You would think so.
But go ahead with your story.
He has another dream, which is basically the same dream, except this time it's 11 stars.
But he keeps this to himself, right? Because he's learned his lesson.
No, he tells this one, too.
Yeah, I know.
And this time, the sun and the moon are also bowing down.
And gets his mom and dad involved.
Yeah, so they're kind of like, even us, Joseph?
Son?
Like, what's going on here? And so, like, again, you kind of question, what's Joseph doing? What is he thinking? Why would he tell this dream?
Dreams you just keep to yourself.
Yeah, and really the problem with this is Joseph's brothers don't like him anyway.
That's true.
Like, if Joseph and his family were already, like, really close and he said this dream, they kind of be like, it's a little odd. That's a weird dream. I don't know about that one, Joseph. But, they wouldn't react in the way that they do. But Joseph is the favorite son, and so... And he's obviously the favorite son. That's really
obvious. Dad has set him up pretty big.
Yeah, exactly. If he was just the favorite, it'd probably be okay. But, he's the favorite, and Dad's given him, like, this coat of many colors, and it's like, I think I'd be offended if I was one of his brothers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I would do what they do.
I hope not.
But, so... what they do is they...
Bryson, if you're watching, your little brother is thinking about things that... Take warning.
Yeah, if you have any dreams whenever, like, I'm bowing down to you or something, don't tell me about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they concoct this plan where basically they throw Joseph in this well, and at first they're going to, like, kill him. But then Reuben tells them, "No, we can't do that. Like, it's a terrible idea."
Thinking?
and his plan is he's going to come back and rescue Joseph. Right? So, which is kind of odd. Like, Reuben's not exactly a good character, but he has good qualities, I guess. He wants to protect his little brother. And so they're going to throw him in this well, and they do. They throw him in the well.
He's in there.
And so they, like, tear up his coat of many colors and dip it in blood so that they can go back and tell their dad that he was eaten by wild animals. And then this caravan of Ishmaelite slave traders passes by, and they sell Joseph.
We won't kill him, but let's just sell him.
Yeah.
At least make a profit. I think one of them actually says that, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. So anyway, they sell Joseph into slavery. And Joseph goes down to Egypt, which is our topic.
That's our topic. That's how we bring it all circled around now.
Yes. So he goes down to Egypt, and he's in the house of this guy named Potiphar, who is the captain of Pharaoh's guard.
Very important fellow.
And this is what it says. This is the reason I say that the theme of this is God is with us. He's at work in our difficulties. So Genesis 39, verses 1 through 2 says, "Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master."
What translation are you using?
ESV.
That's good. I like that. Became a successful man.
What did yours say?
Joseph prospered. I mean, I get it. The NIV, yeah, go ahead. I like the ESV. I think is a little truer to the original language. So I'm going to compliment you on your choice of translations.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, so he goes down and he's in Egypt, and it says God is with him.
Yes.
And I think this is like the important part of this story, which is often not what we get out of this story.
Yeah.
I think most of the time we read this story and we say, look, Joseph's such a hard worker that Potiphar sees him and he's like, man, Joseph's so good at working, I'm gonna promote him. And that's not
Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. That's not what it says. What it says is actually God is with Joseph, and so because Potiphar recognizes that God is with him, everything he does is successful. Potiphar puts him over the whole house.
And don't you think, and you're going to get to this, so I won't belabor it, but don't you think that a lot of that has to do, too, with the fact it's not just that God was with Joseph, but that Joseph understood that God was with him, and he makes sure he acknowledges that.
Yeah, exactly. So, going on with the story, you have really three of these moments.
Yeah.
Whenever Joseph is in this hard place, and then something really good happens to him. So, first, you have Joseph, he's sold into slavery, and then something really good happens. Potiphar recognizes that God is with Joseph, and so he puts Joseph over all of his house.
That's right.
So Joseph actually becomes relatively important, pretty quick. Right?
Good point.
Potiphar is an important guy, and now Joseph is over all of Potiphar's household, but problems arise. So Potiphar's wife recognizes that Joseph's a good-looking guy, and so she basically wants him to sleep with her. Another PG moment. Yeah. So she tries to seduce him, but he won't let her.
No.
Because he basically says that Potiphar has set him over the entire house, and he's given him everything except her, because she's his wife, and so how could he do this thing against God? So again, Joseph is acknowledging who's the one that's blessing him here. He's not saying how can I sin against my master? How can I sin against this guy who's given me all this stuff? No, he says, how can I sin against God?
Yeah, one of the most common sense phrase, you've all heard it. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Mm-hmm. But I don't think most of us get that. God is so good to us. Every time you get something good, you would think to yourself, you know what, I'm going to remember God. And next time I'm in the basin, I'm in the depth, I'm in the valley, I'm going to remember God. But we don't tend to do that. Yeah. And then we get to the mountaintops, and guess what we think? Man, I did a good job.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a lot of the problem that we have in life is, I think the valleys are meant to prepare us for the mountaintops, right?
Yes.
We can see if God is with me in these difficulties, then he's also the one that brought me to the mountaintop.
Yeah. If he's with me in my suffering, then he needs to be the point of my worship when I get to the top of the mountain.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway.
Ooh, that was good stuff. We could write a sermon on that. But we're not done.
So Joseph seems like relatively constantly being...
That's number 2, yeah.
Yeah, she's going after him constantly. And one day he goes into the house to do work,
it's not good.
Nobody else is in the house except her.
Yeah,
and so she tries to seduce him, but he runs away. Yeah. Good job, Joseph, except she grabs onto his garment and rips it off of him. And so he keeps going because, what else are you supposed to do?
What are you going to do?
But she uses that as evidence to say that, he
attacked me.
Yeah, exactly.
He tried to rape me.
Yeah. Another PG moment there.
Sorry about that, parents. Yeah, and so, but he, like you say, he's out of there. But again, you acknowledge, in that moment that he, again, is keeping his focus where his focus needs to be. James will tell us that we need to flee Satan. And Joseph is a living illustration of that. To King James uses a wonderful word. It's called eschew. I love that word, eschew. E-S-C-H-E-W, I think. Eschew, which means to get out of there. Yeah. Joseph is the leading man.
Yeah, exactly. So Joseph eschews evil in this case, and Potiphar's wife uses his garment to frame him. And so she...
Wicked woman.
Yeah, she basically gets her husband to throw Joseph into prison.
Can I bring something in here that I don't think you're going to touch on later?
Yes.
I've always wondered, when Joseph becomes second in command, is Potiphar still married to this woman? And if so, when she comes to court, and she's among the dignitaries, was it really awkward? Mm-hmm. And did she bow to Joseph like she was supposed to? And in that moment, did she just hope he didn't pick her out and say, okay, you go to the gallows, woman?
I have no idea. But
okay, that's just extra. Sense, you brought me in for commentary or something.
It could be. I don't know. I don't think
I bring color to the show, folks. Just think about that. Because something like that probably happened. Mm-hmm. Unless she died right after this event. We got no indication of that. She probably had some level of interaction with Joseph when he becomes like a bigwig.
Yeah.
He's no longer cleaning the floors in the house. He now become a master.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's enough Sonny Childs. We are back to Gabriel.
Okay, so Joseph is thrown into prison. And then, again...
that's 3.
Well...
Isn't it?
No, that's 2.
Oh, that's still 2?
That's... Yeah, because...
Because that's because of Potiphar's wife.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
so
this
is number 2. Joseph is thrown into prison. And yet we recognize God's with him at this point, too.
Yes, he is.
Because of what
happens?
Says in verses 21 through 23 here.
Still 39?
Yes, still 39. It says, but the Lord was with Joseph.
There it is.
So I don't even need to read any farther.
Yeah, you go ahead.
But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him.
Wow. So there you go.
Yeah. So you have, again, this scenario. This is, I think, even odder, more odd. Otter.
It could be.
It's not a semi-aquatic animal. No. It's even more odd than the first story, right? Because I don't know much about prisons, but it seems like putting a prisoner in charge of things probably isn't like the best idea. I feel like that's probably not what they do most of the time. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they always had like one guy who was in charge. Top prisoner,
prisoner of the month.
Yeah, exactly.
Joseph gets it every month.
But anyway, so the keeper of the prison keeper, he puts Joseph in charge of all of these things. And again, it says it's because God is with him. So again, I think we always look at this and we say, how can I be like Joseph?
Yeah.
I need to be this really good worker, and if I do all of these good things, then I'm going to get promoted. And we're like this very work-centric society in America, right? And so we have a lot of these work ideas about this. But this isn't about work, right? This is about God being with Joseph. And so, you kind of ask the question of how do I earn God's favor? Can I earn God's favor? And that's probably a question for another time.
Probably.
But that's what's going on here. Is this has nothing to do with Joseph. It has everything to do with the fact that God has favored Joseph. And so all of these things keep working out for Joseph because of God.
I think I would add that, what's my favorite word?
Initiative.
I think that, when you do that, you say initiative and all of a sudden you get this idea as all me. And that's not at all what I intend to. Initiative, I think, is like the difference between the 5-talent man and the 1-talent man. The 5-talent man, everything he has is still his master's. Mm-hmm. Same with the 1-talent. But the only difference between the two is they decided to do something for their master that was completely radically different. The 5-talent guy says, I am going to do something so make sure my master gets more money when he gets back here. The 1-talent guy says, I am scared to death of my master, so I'm going to go bury it in the backyard so that when he gets back, he won't beat on me. And you can see, I think the 5-talent man was constantly focused on the master. The 1-talent man is focused on what's going to happen to me if I lose this money.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the only level of initiative that we should see here with Joseph is that he recognized his master. Mm-hmm. And so everything's going to be praised him. Even, I know I'm running ahead, But when we get to the point of interpreting the dreams, he's got that moment where he could claim it as, oh yeah, I can interpret dreams. Yeah, I'm the man. But he doesn't. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think you have this idea of initiative being, obviously, it's this thing. Joseph obviously has it, right? Because that's basically what it says is everything Joseph does, God blesses, which implies Joseph is doing things, right? And so, yeah, I think you kind of have the question of, like, is Joseph actually a hard worker? It seems like Joseph probably doesn't have to work as hard as everybody else because God blesses him. Everything just works out for Joseph. And yet at the same time, he still has to go and, put the shovel to the dirt. He still has to go and do all of these things. It's just that all of these things work out.
And don't say the big work, the big labor is he kept his eyes on God. Mm-hmm. He wasn't going to get distracted. And you can see in your whole lineup there how easy it would be to be distracted, Mm-hmm. My brothers hate me. Woe is me. I'm just going to go sit down. The wife of the main man here, she likes me, Mm-hmm. Sex is good, so I'm just going to let myself go. Mm-hmm. All the way through the story, you can see how he had to keep the initiative of focus.
Yeah.
It wasn't that he was the one, if you will, bringing the blessing. It was that he was acknowledging the one who gave him the blessings.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's both that God is with Joseph and also that Joseph acknowledges that God is with him.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, like Joseph's going to do this in a much more profound way later on in the story. So at this point in the story, Joseph's in prison. He's taking care of business and all of these different things. And then Pharaoh gets upset with his...
Grandma says, prisoner of the month. Grandpa had a good... When I said prisoner of the month, Grandpa liked that.
Oh, that's...
Thanks, Dad. We appreciate the laughter. We need to get a soundtrack, a laughter track. Mm-hmm. When I say stuff, then it gets...
Yeah, you can have one of those keyboards.
I'll hit the button.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Maybe not.
No.
Anyway, so the cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh do something. It's not ever clarified what they did exactly or if they both did the same thing. But they're both thrown into prison with Joseph.
Yes.
And they both have a dream. So the cupbearer has this dream in which he takes I think these three grapevines or something along those lines, and he squeezes out the grapes and makes wine, and then takes it to Pharaoh. And then the baker has this dream where he's carrying 3 baskets of bread on his head, and the crows come and eat the bread. So you have both of these dreams, and Joseph interprets both of the dreams, right?
Yes, he does.
And so he tells the cupbearer that in 3 days you're going to go and you're going to be brought back. Pharaoh's going to let you have your job back, basically, and take you out of prison, which is nice. Yeah. And then he tells the baker that Pharaoh's going to execute him in 3 days again. There's your interpretation of this dream that these guys have. And the thing that's interesting about it isn't really the interpretation, it's the fact that it happens exactly like Joseph says it will, right?
Yeah.
He says these things are going to happen, and they do.
And the modern day people, making all these predictions, and they claim that the Holy Spirit told me this, that, and the other. They rarely give you the time frames like Joseph did, and it's got 3 days. Sometime this month, this big thing, Now, if God's talking to you, give me something specific here, And Joseph, he again, acknowledging God and his power, God able to put the specifics to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So Joseph interprets these dreams, and then on Pharaoh's birthday,
verse 20,
which is a little odd. I didn't know that they celebrated birthdays back then.
Evidently, Pharaoh has one.
I guess they all do. So I guess important people get to celebrate them. Herod also celebrates his birthday in the New Testament.
He was an important guy.
And people always get executed at these for some reason.
I was about to say, well, I celebrate my birthday, but then you went to the execution thing, and I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I've never executed anyone on my birthday.
That's good.
Anyway, so Pharaoh, he has his birthday, and he decides he's going to give the cupbearer his job back, and he's going to execute the baker, just like Joseph said.
Just like.
And this is kind of Joseph basically tells the cupbearer, like, remember me whenever you go back to Pharaoh. I have to imagine he didn't say that to the baker.
Probably not. Who's he going to tell?
That's a good point. Anyway, so he tells the cupbearer to remember him, and then the cupbearer doesn't.
Yeah, what's with that?
Yeah, so I guess that's the third thing.
That's number 3. I put 3 up now?
Yes, you can put 3 up now. As Joseph, it's kind of still the second thing.
Kind of.
But it's the second thing continues much longer than it necessarily needed to.
Forgotten in prison.
Yes. Yeah, so Joseph's forgotten there for 2 years.
See, at that point, that's where I probably would have broke down. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It probably got to me a lot earlier than that. But let's just say I survived Potiphar's wife and all that mess, okay? Mm-hmm. You know, and now here I am, and boom, God speaks to me. I can interpret dreams. I got hope. This thing's looking up, you know? Hey, man, when you get to Pharaoh, you remember me. And day after day after day, year, then the next year, I'd probably at that point say, does anybody even know I'm here?
Yeah. Well, they do, apparently, because 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh has 2 dreams actually. Yeah. So they're basically the same.
But why does God wait so long?
I don't know. That's one of the odd questions about this story, I think, and I think it's one of those questions about God's providence. That's
we need to buy into this.
But like, why does God wait so long? Why does God let the famine happen at all?
Good.
You know, like,
good point.
If there was no famine, Joseph didn't have to go through any of this stuff, right? But God lets the famine happen, and all he does is, like, fix it with Joseph. And so you kind of have to ask yourself the question of, like, why does God let these things happen? And I think the answer has, to do with man's sinful nature, right?
Probably.
That we've messed things up, and God, in His grace, wants to allow us to keep on living and to, have free will and all of those different things. And so, because of that, God allows things to happen, and obviously they'd be better off not happening. But it seems that He also makes a way in all of these bad things for good things to happen, or at least for the bad things to be allayed somewhat.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I don't know that it necessarily is conclusive that it would be better if that didn't happen. When you consider, that, we don't know. You and I read this, within 5 chapters, we've got the story down, and boom, boom, boom. It didn't happen that way. We've got years that are transpiring throughout this. But my thought is, what's God doing during those years that didn't get recorded in Scripture? Maybe they're minor details that weren't important enough to be inspired part of the Word, but they still happen. That God continued to move in Joseph's life. He continued to bless him. And, so there's other things that took place we don't have in the record. And so those 2 years were not just wasted. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think that even if they were just 2 years, you got to sit there in the prison cell and be still until I'm ready to get you out of there. Even if that's the case, God's still righteous because He's God, and His plan is paramount. We've got to stick with the plan of God, allow Him to work things out as He does. But I think, back to my point, this is where I would have gotten discouraged, because I've done so good, God. I've been a good little boy. I've taken initiative, and they've recognized I'm a good guy. He even came and let me interpret 2 dreams, and yet here I sit 2 years later. What in the world? I would have been that guy. I would have been the whiny Elijah in the cave. God, I'm the only one left. And God says, come on, man, buck up. It's your show. You continue.
All right. Before we move on, I forgot to mention the picture.
Oh, yes. I love pictures. I can't.
This is not the prison that Joseph was in.
It's not?
No, this is actually in Rome. But so it's not even in the right country. But this is the type of prison that Joseph theoretically would have been in. He describes it as being the pit.
Yeah.
On several occasions. And so basically what this is a hole in the ground, almost like a well, but you'd be lowered through that top hole there, and then you'd be in this prison cell. This is the prison where they think that Peter and Paul would have been kept in Rome. And so,
wow.
Who knows? But
you know that one Batman movie that had that guy that breathed through the thing?
Yes.
That one? Yeah. Remember that one showed Batman in a prison that was like a hole in the ground. You remember that?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm picturing when you tell me this story.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the idea, is that they put them just like in this pit, and then they're down there in the pit. And obviously they can bring people back up and lower them down and all of those different things. But it's basically a hole in the ground is where they're living.
And Joseph is managing this group of men, evidently, who are in this hole in the ground, but evidently does it very, very well. He manages them well.
Yeah, exactly. But you kind of question, like, what jobs could Joseph have had, like, in this hole in the ground?
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know. Maybe they brought them out and had them do forced labor or something.
They could have.
Joseph was in charge.
They had ropes back then.
They did have
ropes. They built the pyramids. They might. Anyhow, go ahead.
Yeah, so, yeah. So that's the prison that they were in. And this is not the pharaoh that's...
Is that King Tut?
That's King Tut. But it is a pharaoh. So
probably the most famous of our day.
Yeah, so... Anyway, there's a picture of King Tut.
That helps me a lot.
Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh, 2 dreams. Pharaoh has one dream in which there's these 7 fat cows that are up on the Nile River. They're on the bank of the river, and these 7 skinny cows come out and eat them, which that's such a disturbing idea.
The wimpy cows eating the buff cows.
Yeah, exactly. But it specifically says they don't get any fatter. They just eat them and they stay gaunt and skinny. And
hamburger and steak and doesn't even gain an ounce.
Yeah, I imagine those cartoons where this vacuum will suck up things that are way too big to fit in the vacuum or something. Yeah. I think that's kind of what's going on there. But anyway, the skinny cows eat the fat cows, and then he has a second dream where there's these nice plump grain things. Plump.
I don't think plump goes with grain.
Oh, does it not? Anyway, it's good
plump
grain.
Goes with grapes.
Oh, does it?
I don't know what grains, but they're really...
yeah, so they're good. Fat, maybe?
Fat. Let's go with fat.
I don't know. It's good grain.
Very healthy.
There's this not good grain that, again, comes out of the Nile River and eats the good grain, and you kind of say, what in the world?
I would.
And apparently Pharaoh does.
Evidently. He wakes up and says, what in the world?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a loose translation of the Hebrew, but that's what he said.
Yeah, I think what it actually says is he was troubled in his soul.
That's what in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, obviously this is a time period whenever they, actually take dreams seriously.
Correct.
So we have dreams, and you kind of say, man, that was a weird dream. I must have, eaten something bad before I went to bed or something, we just kind of dismissed them. But back in this day, they took dreams really seriously. And so Pharaoh, again, he says, what in the world? But, he's troubled because he thinks this could mean something.
Right.
What does this mean? And we know that because he brings in interpreters. And nobody can tell him what this dream is about until the cupbearer remembers Joseph.
There you go.
And the cupbearer remembers Joseph and calls him out of prison, and he comes and interprets the dream to Pharaoh. And this is what he says. No, I'm sorry, this is not what he says. This is after that. He says there's going to be 7 years of plenty. 7 fat cows. And then there's going to be 7 years of famine, 7 skinny cows. And basically, he says that you should be storing up grain and food and all of those different things during the 7 years of plenty, so that you have it during the 7 years of famine.
Good thinking.
Then Pharaoh responds.
Okay.
And he says, he doesn't say anything actually. It says this proposal pleased Pharaoh, verses 37 through 41 of chapter 41. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?"
Wow.
Right? So even Pharaoh recognizes that God is with Joseph. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt."
Wow. Joseph says, "I am the man."
You would think so.
You would think.
But
he doesn't, does he?
No, it seems like he doesn't. In fact, the reason that Pharaoh knows that God has put his spirit on Joseph is because Joseph says so. Right? Pharaoh basically says, "I heard you could interpret dreams," and Joseph's like, "No, I can't. But God can."
Yeah.
And so, I'll do my best.
No, I can't. And Pharaoh draws his saber. Let's kill this guy. But God can.
Yeah, exactly. So Joseph survives.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Joseph is set over all of the land of Egypt, and then that's kind of where we're going to end up with our story.
Oh, yeah.
We'll continue on with some more thoughts, but from that point on, he does what he said he would do, right? He stores up all the grain, and then the 7 years of famine come. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt, and Joseph meets them and knows they're his brothers, but they don't recognize him, and so he tests them to see whether or not they are good guys now. And what's interesting is that it seems like they are.
Yeah, they kind of prove that with the way they protect their little brother, who they should have protected in Joseph, but now they're going to protect him in Benjamin.
Yeah, exactly. So we've seen that God is at work in our difficulties. God is also at work in spite of our sin. So Genesis 37, 25 through 28 says, "Then they sat down to eat." This is all of Joseph's brothers, basically, except, I guess, Reuben. "And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, 'What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood?'" So you mentioned this earlier, that
I said that, didn't I?
Judah's basically like, we could make some money off of this. So what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So obviously we've backtracked quite a ways, but basically what I want you to notice is the fact that Judah is the one that is kind of instigating this story, which is interesting because of what happens next. So Joseph basically meets his brothers and says that if you ever want to come back and get more grain, you're going to have to bring your youngest brother, so that I can have it proven to me that you're not spies.
Right.
This is the second time you kind of question what Joseph is doing. Like, is he a good guy or not? Because, first, he's been prideful with his brothers, maybe, and now he's lying about things, and you're kind of like, is this okay? Is this moral? I don't know. So maybe Joseph's fine, and maybe he's not. I don't really know. Anyway, Joseph tests his brothers, and he says he thinks that they're spies, which he clearly doesn't, because he knows who they are.
Right.
And again, he says, "You got to bring back your littlest brother, Benjamin, if you want to get food again." So they go back to the land of Canaan, and they bring back all this food that they've had. Once they eat all the food, they have to go back for more. And they want to bring Benjamin so that they can get more food and not be arrested. And their dad says, no, you can't take Benjamin, because if you take Benjamin, then he's going to be captured or something. Something bad's going to happen to him in Egypt. And then I'm going to die because I've lost one son already.
Right.
And now you're going to kill me with grief, basically.
Pause. Don't you ever consider how long these guys held this lie from their daddy?
Mm-hmm.
And they get to this point, and I realize that, at this point they don't know that Joseph is Joseph. But, Daddy's still bringing this up all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to kill me. I've already lost one son, and now you want to take... No, we can't, You'd think at some point one of them would break down and say, Dad, I got to tell you, this is really what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't.
They don't know. Which is weird. Why are they...
Oh, man, can you imagine a conscience?
Yeah, you would think that they would say, actually, we sold Joseph into slavery, so maybe we could go find him or something.
There's hope, Dad.
But they don't. And what's interesting is Judah actually seems to have some transformation here.
Okay.
All right, he has some character development. And I think a lot of this is because of what happens in chapter 38. So we didn't talk about chapter 38.
No.
But
no, we didn't.
Basically what happens in 38...
Another one of those moments, guys.
Yes. We just want to talk about that part, okay? So...
Daughter-in-law and dad.
Judah marries... he gets a wife for one of his sons, basically. But his son is evil, and so God kills him.
This is the short version.
This is the short version, the PG version. They're supposed to do this thing called levirate marriage, where the brother marries the wife of his deceased brother if they don't have kids, so that they can have kids. And this brother does marry her, but then he won't have kids with her. We won't talk about how he goes about making sure that he doesn't, but he does make sure that he doesn't have kids with her, and so God kills him too. And then Judah's kind of like, I got one son left, but I don't want him to be killed, and so he keeps him away from Tamar, the daughter-in-law. And then later on, Tamar tricks Judah into sleeping with her, and she gets pregnant, and it's a whole thing, right?
Talk about a biblical soap opera.
This is a rough story. But anyway, I think this is kind of this moment whenever Judah, I think, probably learns his lesson, right? That he has been the one that has made it so that his dad lost a son, right? And now Judah's lost two sons.
Wow.
And I think that's why it's important that it's right here in the middle of the story.
I never even picked up on that.
I think this is where Judah gets his character development.
Because it is kind of an aside, like you say. We got this story developing, and then all of a sudden now we're going to switch to Judah and Tamar.
Mm-hmm.
What's that have to do with Egypt and starving to death and famines and Joseph?
Yeah.
And then we're going to immediately go back to Joseph again. Mm-hmm. It's this aside. That's a very good point. I'm proud of you.
Well, thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
So anyway, I think Judah learns his lesson from all of this. And here's the thing. I think a lot of times we have these sins in our lives, and we think, number one, God probably isn't with me anymore because I've been sinful. And number two, if something bad happens, we immediately think, oh, obviously God is punishing me for these sins. And God does some of that, but it seems like what God actually does most of the time is he just kind of takes people off the chessboard. He doesn't really punish people as in I just really don't like you, and so you've done all this bad stuff, so I'm going to punish you for it. And it seems like it's either character development, like in the case of Judah, that he's being punished, but I don't think he's being punished as in man, I just really want to torture you, right? I don't think God does that. I think that's how we think of God a lot of the time, is he just wants to torture us, but what's actually happening, I think, is God wants us to learn our lesson.
Wow.
And so, there comes this moment whenever you've learned your lesson and the punishment ends. That doesn't mean the consequence ends, but God's not punishing you anymore because He's disciplining you so you'll learn something. The other one is God could just kill you.
Take you off the chessboard altogether.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what He does with Judah's sons, right? But at that moment, it's kind of punishment, but at the same time, it's maybe also for everybody else.
Yeah, it's an example.
And so, I think there doesn't come a point whenever God punishes you without hope of repentance unless He's just going to kill you, right? I don't think I can't think of a story in which that happens. Maybe it does, but I don't think that really happens. Unless He's working out something for somebody else. Like Pharaoh and the plagues. Obviously, He knows Pharaoh's not going to repent at a certain point, and he keeps going. But that's for the benefit of the children of Israel. It's for the benefit of the other Egyptians.
Right.
Right. And so, there's a lot more going on here. I don't think God just punishes people for the sake of punishing them, which is something I think we kind of think sometimes.
I do.
I've done this bad thing, and so obviously I've lost God's favor. That He is punishing me for whatever this bad thing is, and that's the whole story of Job, right? That's the whole idea. The point of this story is okay, what have you done, Job, to deserve all of this punishment? And basically, the end of the story is Job didn't do anything. And so the point is, not everything happens because we did something wrong, right? It's also the story of Joseph, right? He didn't do anything, and yet he keeps getting punished. I think we would say.
Well, that's a powerful application for us. You think of Paul, and here he is. He wanted to get to Rome, but he ends up in Rome as a prisoner. And the righteous, inspired apostle who writes 3/4 of our New Testament, and here he is, imprisoned in Rome. And so, what's up, God? Why are you punishing Paul? Well, read the book of Philippians. Paul doesn't think it's a punishment at all. He rejoices in the fact that he's got this situation. And I kind of put that on Joseph. I think that Joseph rejoiced in prison, at least to the extent that he was willing to do his job well and make sure God got the glory for it. And if we can, in our sufferings, in spite of our sins, which we all have, if we can recognize that, this may not be so much about the fact that I've sinned as it is that God is trying to develop my character so that in the future maybe I won't sin in this particular realm, or that I'll just be a better representative of His.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's also the third thing of maybe this isn't happening because of anything I did at all.
Yes. We're just in a fallen world.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there's some of that application here, but obviously this is character development for Judah, right? And so
definitely.
Judah's character is developed, and you can see that from what he says.
Right.
So they do take Benjamin back to Egypt, and Joseph basically says he's going to keep Benjamin because he still thinks they're spies, because he keeps planting stolen gold in their bags. I don't know. I don't know if this is okay or not.
I keep wanting to think that Joseph's not a vindictive character, but at the same time, he kind of made his brothers pay for it.
Yeah.
He drew this thing out,
Yeah, and so later on, whenever they come up and they're like, are you going to punish us now that Dad's dead? Joseph could kind of be like, no, guys, I already did that.
Yeah, we took care of that, remember?
Anyway, so he says he's going to keep Benjamin, and Judah goes on this big, long spiel about why he can't do that, and he summarizes basically the whole story up until this point, and says, basically, our dad's going to die if you keep Benjamin. So then he says this, Genesis 44:30 through 34, now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servant will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant, talking about himself, he keeps referring to like his dad and himself and everybody as being your servant, so it's a little confusing.
Yeah, but it's a good approach if you're talking
It is
to
a
guys.
good approach. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now therefore, please let your servant remain. Let me remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father.
Big deal. It's a big commitment.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we haven't really seen anything to suggest up to this point that Judah is this kind of character that would be willing to stay in prison for the sake of Benjamin, other than the fact that he promises Jacob that he will. But then, I mean, that's just him saying he will, right? Like,
he's right in the middle of a lie that he promises that he's going to do better within the middle of the lie. I promise,
exactly.
But I'm not going to tell you the real truth that got me into this need to make a promise.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of wonder, like, is he being real here? Is he just saying, like, I don't think anything's going to happen, so it's going to be fine? But apparently he is serious, right? Because he proves it.
Right.
And it's at this point that Joseph breaks down and tells his brothers who he is, and they're all reunited and everything. And it's a happy story.
Big deal.
Yeah. But it all happens because God works these things out in spite of sin, in spite of Judah's sin in this case. And Judah has this character development because of all these things that happen. But we see at the end of the story that he has proven to Joseph that he's better than he was all those years ago. Whenever they sold Joseph into slavery.
Yeah, we've gone from a guy who was willing to sell his brother, sleep with his daughter-in-law, and who else knows what else is all tied up in all that mess, to a guy who's willing to actually become a slave of Joseph in Egypt so that my little brother can go home and my daddy don't die.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of character development there.
Yeah, and Judah and Tamar are in the genealogy of Jesus, by the way. So.
Thank you, son.
You're welcome.
Trying to end on a high note here.
Anyway, so those are the two times whenever God is in our life. Obviously, he's in it all the time, but he works during our what was it?
Difficulties.
During our difficulties, and he works in spite of our sin. And he does this to save many lives. Right?
That's a good point.
I don't think this is how we typically think of it, yet it's what Joseph says. So, Genesis chapter 50 now, verses 15 through 21.
Okay.
So flipping ahead quite a ways, Joseph has taken all of his family to Egypt, and they're all living there happily. And then Jacob eventually dies. But he's lived a good, long life in Egypt. And so things actually worked out pretty well.
Well, he's had a story. You can make a movie out of that guy's life.
You could. They probably have.
Oh, yeah.
So Genesis 50, 15 through 21. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." You can kind of say, maybe Joseph should. I think he deserves a little vindication here. But then he kind of did that already. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you." And it doesn't say if Jacob actually said any of those things.
I was wondering.
It doesn't clarify if they're lying or not. It seems like since they thought of this after Jacob died, that probably...
Yeah, I'm thinking
they maybe didn't actually say it.
Forged Dad's name at the bottom of that letter.
Yeah, they might have. But anyway, so they say this, and then they continue on. "And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So what's interesting about this is Joseph is actually fulfilling a promise that God makes to Abraham, right? So in Genesis chapter 12, God tells Abraham that through him, all of the families of the earth are going to be blessed. And Joseph basically fulfills this promise, right? Like, I think, this is the whole known world, basically, at this point. So all the families of the earth are being blessed by Joseph.
Wow.
Because, he saves many lives, right? He makes sure that many people can be kept alive as they are today, in his words. And so Joseph does. He saves many lives. He fulfills this Genesis chapter 12 promise to Abraham because everybody in the world is going to be coming to Egypt to get food because there's a famine.
Right.
Over the whole
powerful
application.
World.
So Joseph fulfills this promise to Abraham. Jesus also fulfills that same promise.
Certainly, in a bigger way.
Yeah, definitely. So Jesus actually fulfills the promise to all of the families of the earth. Only this, in this sense, a spiritual way, right? Like Joseph saves their lives, Jesus saves their souls, their spiritual lives. But what that means for us is that I think we tend to think of that promise as something that only Jesus can do, right? That only Jesus can bless all the families of the earth. And yet, Joseph did. And so, what's to stop us from also being a part of that story and being a part of this, saving many lives, right? And so, we too can be a blessing to all of those people. Everyone that we come into contact with, we can help them. We can be a blessing to them, like Joseph was.
Yeah.
And so, if Joseph can do this, then we can too. And so, our application here, God is always working. Right? That's our thesis. God is always working, and we should be too.
That's good. That's good.
And so, that's basically what I want to leave you guys with, is this idea of God is always working, and so we should be doing likewise. Actually, Jesus says something very similar in the New Testament. He says, God is working till now, and so I am as well, to paraphrase. And so I think we have that same responsibility, right? That we recognize God is constantly working in all of our lives, and so we should be reciprocating,
Amen.
Working in each other's lives.
Good lesson, my friend.
So here's the questions for the SBS students. You can take a picture of those or whatever you need to do so that you can have them. And as I said before, next week we're going to be talking about parting the Red Sea. So we're going to get to Moses. We're finally going to be out of Genesis. I think we've talked about Genesis every lesson.
Exit us.
Yes, yeah. We're going to be talking about the book of exiting.
Book of exiting. I like that.
We're going to be leaving Egypt next week, going back to the Promised Land. All right. So that's the lesson. I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and we will talk to you next week.
God bless.
Bye.